Hey Sugar Snaps, welcome to the Textile Indie YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Brittany. I'm happy to have you. If you're an old friend, welcome into the studio. Today I have a quick tutorial on how to use macrame scraps to create a little yarn bowl. These are really fun and quick to make up, and it's a great way to use up the little short ends of macrame cord that's still valuable material, but maybe is too short for your macrame projects. Here at Textile Indie, we've been using Ganchet macrame materials. Ganchet is a company that produces recycled and eco-friendly materials for fiber artists like macrame artists, knitters, and weavers. And this is scrap from their 5mm 3-ply recycled cotton macrame cord. And I didn't want to toss it, so I wanted to come up with a project that could use this material in something useful or fun to make. So here is your little crochet project for today. So grab your crochet hook, your macrame scraps, and some worsted weight yarn, and let's make a little bowl. To make your coiled scrap basket, you're going to need some worsted weight yarn, scraps of macrame cord, and I'm using 5mm 3-ply macrame cord from Ganchet, and then a crochet hook, and I am using US H. So the first thing you're going to do is find the tail end of your yarn and pull out a length so you have something to work with. And then we're going to create a slip knot. So we're going to use crochet techniques to complete this basket. So I'm going to start by looping this around and creating a slip knot in the end of my yarn. And I have a little tail. Then I'm going to slide my crochet hook onto that slip knot, or slide the slip knot onto my crochet hook and tighten it up so it's semi-tight. And then grab a piece of your macrame cord scrap, and we're going to hold the macrame cord in our left hand, set the crochet hook on top of the macrame cord, and then the strand that's coming from your yarn bundle, this you're going to have lay over top. So then we're going to dip under the cord. We're going to grab this yarn, and then we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So again, what that looks like is take the slip knot on your hook, lay this on top of the end of the macrame cord, slide your crochet hook under the cord, catch the yarn that's laying on top, pull it up and under, making sure to hold this yarn out away from the cord, and then you're going to catch another loop onto the hook and pull this loop through the 2 loops that are on your crochet hook. So now you have 2 loops wrapped around this cord. Now we're going to chain 1. So take this yarn coming from your yarn skein, yarn over on your crochet hook and pull through, chain 1. And now we're going to dip the crochet hook under the macrame cord again, lay the yarn on top, bring it up and around. So we're just catching a loop and having that come up to the surface, and then yarn over the loop again, or the hook again, and then go through both loops on the hook. We're going to do this 5 times. So yarn over, chain 1, and then go under the macrame cord with the yarn going on top of the macrame cord, catch the yarn with your hook, bring it up and around, and then yarn over and pull this loop through the 2 loops on your hook. Now I'll slide these over so that they're close together. So we're starting to create a little mini loop. Now chain 1, take your hook, put it under the macrame cord, catch your yarn, yarn over, pull through the loop. Again, slide your stitch over so that they're nice and tight. This will help us create our loop. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do 1 more. So chain 1, and then loop under, catch your yarn, yarn over, and loop through 2. Now I'm going to loop this around, and you can decide whether you want to tuck this in or out. I'm going to tuck the tail of the macrame cord underneath so that it's out of our way. And then I'm going to catch this loop, both loops of the first chain that we created. So catching this little V right here, so I have 2 loops on my crochet hook. I'm going to yarn over, lay the yarn on top, pull through, and pull through this second loop on the hook as well. So do a slip stitch. Now we can spread out our loops on this little starting segment, and now need to orient the macrame cord so that we can start to coil it around right next to the crocheting that we just completed. So find that tail of your yarn and get that out of your way, and the tail of the macrame cord, and kind of hold that with your right hand out of your way. And now we're going to come up, loop the yarn up and around the hook, and do a starting stitch to catch that. Now chain 1, and now we're going to do 2 stitches in between each of the stitches we did on the last round. So if you pull these apart, there's 2 strands and then a space, 2 strands and then a space. We're trying to catch the space. So you've just chained 1, you're going to send your hook through the space so that you're going right against the macrame cord on that last row. So if we flip it over, we're making sure to catch both layers of that yarn from our last row. And then we'll yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and go through the 2 loops, like so. And then chain 1. And then we're going to create another stitch in that same space. So take your hook, pull it, push it through, catch the yarn, pull through, and then yarn over, pull through both loops. Now chain 1, and now we're going to skip over to the next space. So we just finished 2 stitches in this space here. We're going to skip over to this space right here. So I'll put my hook through, catch the yarn, pull through, yarn over, pull through both loops, chain 1, stick my crochet hook into that same space, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through both, and chain 1. So you chain 1 in between each stitch. This helps the coil to spread out and continue to grow as we work. Now we're going to skip to the next space, do 1 stitch, chain 1, do another stitch in the same space, like so, and then chain 1. Now we have 2 stitches in that space, so we're going to move on to this space right here. So catch those loops, yarn over, and try not to split the yarn when you pull through. Make sure to have the whole width of the yarn. So I yarned over, I'm going to pull through 2, chain 1, same space, go through the space, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the 2 loops, chain 1. Just have a few more spaces here and we'll have our second row done. So now we're going to skip over these 2 strands and go into the next space. So these 2 strands are the 2 legs of our last stitch, and this space here is the chain of our last row. So we're going to go into that space, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, chain 1. Grab more yarn as you need it. It's easier to pull out some yarn to work with and not have to be yanking each time you do a stitch. So now I have a stitch in that space. I'm going to do 1 more stitch, like so, chain 1. And now we're almost back to where we started, which is this point where we started that second row. So we're going to come in and separate these because we need to create a stitch in this little space here, and it's kind of tight. So create your space with the head of your hook, get your macrame cord oriented, and then loop the yarn over and pull through, then yarn over, pull through the 2 loops, chain 1, and do 1 more in that same little space that you created, pull through like so. So that is our row 2, and if you lay it on the table, you can see it lays flat. This is the right side, this is the wrong side. It's kind of messy because we have that raw tail of the macrame cord. We will come back and trim this down later, but for now, go ahead and leave it there. So we're going to continue, and I will show you how to join a new piece of macrame scrap. My piece is fairly long to start out with, so I'll show you that when I get to that point. We're going to continue by chaining 1 to start our 3rd row and going into the next space from the previous row, so this space right here, doing the same process where we loop through, yarn over, go through 2 loops, chain 1, go through the same space, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, chain 1. So now we have doubled the number of spaces from the first row that we did. That first row we had 5 stitches. Now we've doubled that and there are more stitches. So we're going to continue working in a stitch 2 into each space where the previous row was a chain. So this space right here, that's where a chain was done on this previous row. I'm going to send my hook through, yarn over and pull a loop through, yarn over and do the 2 loops on there. Now chain 1, go through the same space like so. And we'll continue to stitch like this where we're putting 2 stitches per chained space until we're ready to build the walls. So this is how you get a nice flat bottom to your bowl. You're going to continue working in a spiral so that you're forming a flat surface for the base, and then we'll start to decrease to create the walls. If you find that your piece is starting to bubble, what you can do is do 2 stitches per space, then chain 1, then do 1 stitch in the next space, chain 1, do 2 stitches in the next space. So you're doing a little bit of a, not a decrease, but less stitches in the amount of space that you have so that you don't overfill it. So I just did 2 stitches in this space. In this next space, I would do 1 stitch, chain 1, and then do 2 stitches in this next space. And now I'm coming to the end of this piece of macrame cord. So I'm going to do my last stitch for this space, like so, chain 1. And now I'm actually going to do 1 more stitch right in the next space here. So right in here, because I want to have just about an inch of tail here. Now I'm going to grab another piece of my macrame cord, and I want to tuck the raw end underneath my work and the raw end here underneath my work as well, kind of combined the two, and we're actually going to split this tail in half. So if you take this tail, split it in half, tuck some of these back under your right hand, and then hold the rest of the tail and your yarn in your left hand. We're going to come in to the next space, punch through, catch some yarn, pull through, and now pull nice and snug on this stitch because you want to loop around both layers of that macrame cord and hold it in place. And now yarn over, pull through both loops, and then chain 1. So this stitch is going to be fairly tight, and we need to do that for 2 more stitches. So I've just chained 1. I'm going to go back into that same space, catch the frayed end and my new end, yarn over, pull a loop through, and then situate that stitch so I can pull nice and tight on that stitch, and then yarn over and pull through both loops, and then chain 1. So now you have more tails to the inside and it looks kind of messy. We will come back and trim those down once we have more structure to our bowl and it's not going to come loose on us. So now I'm going to continue alternating 1 stitch per space and 2 stitches per space to continue to build the bottom of my bowl until I'm happy with that diameter. And I'm catching all the strands of the old end and my new end in these stitches to ensure that I secure them as much as possible. When you're happy with how big your base is becoming, you're going to try to end across from where you started in the center. So my little nubbin here where I started is in the center. I'm going to end this row across from that. So I've now switched from 2 stitches in one space and 1 stitch in the next space to 1 stitch per space for this last section. So I have 1 stitch per space here. Now 1 stitch in this space, and I'm almost across. I'm going to do 3 more stitches here. Come into this space, chain 1, next space. Okay, so now I'm almost directly across. Do 1 more stitch just to ensure I have an even base. So now if you lay this down on your work table, you'll notice that your circle is almost equidistant. This tail, because it's spiraling, it's going to cause a little bit more bulk on this side. But now we're going to start building the walls, and I'm going to slope my walls up gently and do a few rows to make this a fairly shallow bowl. So to do that, continue to chain 1 and stitch 1 per space around your bowl 1 more time. Now I'm going to cover those ends from the last row and just keep working. Chain 1, 1 stitch per space. So you can see the wall of the bowl start to lift upwards with that chain 1, 1 stitch per space. Now you can decide whether you want this side to be on the inside of the basket, your nice side. If you're going to be doing a more shallow bowl, this is a good idea because you'll more likely see the inside of the bowl than the outside. If you are going to do a taller bowl, then flip this up, and now your raw ends are going to be inside the basket. This is the way that I'm going to do this guy. So I've just come to another end of my macrame cord. So I'm going to take a new piece, going to split this old piece in half, tuck 1 end back and away, and 1 end overlap with the new piece. So I'm extending this new piece beyond where my stitch is now, so that I have a little bit of a tail, about 1 inch of a tail there. I'm going to hold that with my right hand, bring the yarn on top, and now I'll have 1 chain 1 to do, and then I'm going to do a stitch into this next space, catch a loop, and this one you want to be nice and tight so that it holds those tails nice and snug, and then chain 1 and do a stitch into the next space, catching those tails again. So now after that joint, continue stitching in a space, chaining 1, stitching in a space, and your bowl will gently start to form as you do this. If you want to pull the walls in more dramatically and not have it be a gradual tilt upwards, what you can do is do a chain one in between every other. So I would chain one, do a stitch, skip the chain and do a stitch in the next space, chain one, do a stitch, and then do another stitch in the next space. So we're pulling up on those walls a little bit faster because we're skipping the chain one. We're getting that tilt up a little bit more dramatically. So you can continue in this manner to start to build your walls more dramatically. You can start to see this is lifting up and starting to curve up. So I'm going to continue with this same pattern of chaining one, stitch one, stitch another in the next space, and then chain one, so alternating that chain until I start to feel like my bowl is forming upwards the way I want to, and then I'll go back to doing a chain in between each stitch to maintain that angle. So there is my bowl shape forming. Now I'm going to go back to chain one, stitch one to bring the sides out a little bit more. And I'll continue alternating between those two, the chain one, stitch one, chain one, stitch one, and chain one, stitch one, stitch one, chain one. Of course, anytime you need to add a new length of macrame cord, you can split that end in half, tuck a new end to the inside and overlap so that you see the nice plied sections to the outside. Chain one here, and then go into the next space from the previous row, loop around and pull this yarn tight to hold the end snug. Do your stitch as usual and then chain one and continue working, catching the ends of your previous strand and your new strand at the same time. When you're ready to finish off your basket, you're going to work around the top until you come in line with that starting point on the bottom. So if you look at the bottom, you have a little end, and that's where you started. We're going to work up the wall and crochet the rope around until you get to that same spot on this wall. And this just ensures that your wall ends up being straight across and doesn't have a tilt to it. Like so. So my start was right here. If I work up, this is my end right here. So now to finish off this end, I'm going to tuck the end to the inside of the basket, and to the same stitch that I just created, that same space, I'm going to send my hook, pull this out of my way, loop over, and do a slip stitch by pulling through this loop here, and then do a row of slip stitches around the top of the basket. So one stitch per space. So I'll come in to this next space, yarn over, pull through, and pull through. The next space, yarn over, pull through, and pull through, pull through, and pull through. And we're just creating a little edge around the top here to support this upper edge. So next space, pull through, pull through. You want a nice loose stitch here. And I'm doing a slip stitch into each space, which means my stitch needs to be extra long because there's actually multiple stitches we're skipping over. So if you take your hook, you send it through a space, and I'm looking at the spaces with the white poking through. going through that space, I'm pulling through and then pulling through the loop on the hook, and then pull on the loop that you've created so that you have enough length to skip over to the next space. So I'll come to this space, pull through and pull through, and that gives me enough stitch length here to skip over those stitches. And this is giving us a little bit of a kind of braided edge or stitched edge to the top of our bowl. Pull through, create a nice heavy stitch or long stitch. So you can pull through and pull through. And then when you've come back to where you started, we'll take this loop, cut about a 10-inch tail from our yarn, and then send the end through that loop, pull all the way through, and tighten down. And now we'll take a tapestry needle or a yarn needle, thread the yarn through. We're going to stitch this into the wall of the basket by opening this up and stitching it in along like so, just sending it backwards into the piece, and then I'll stitch down and send it backwards into the next row down. So I've zigzagged this way, now I'm zigzagging this way. And one more row to make sure this is nice and secure right in here. And then I will cut this tail, and I'll do the same thing. I can turn this inside out, catch this tail from my starting point, and I'll loop this around this curve through a few stitches, and then back in the other direction through a few stitches, and then cut this tail. And now all of these tails, the rope tails, we can come in and trim them down flush with the inside of the basket. And then if any tails stuck out to the outside, you can come in and trim those away as well to ensure it's nice and neat. And now you can play around with, if you want the nice side on the outside, you can leave it there, or flip it inside out. If you want these little baubles as texture and decoration to the outside, you can also manipulate these, and as you are adding them to your basket, you can position them where you want. So starting and ending new strands in different positions, so you end up with little like pom-poms on the outside of your bowl, and you can play around with that. I think I'm going to leave these to the inside like so, and there is my little bowl using macrame scrap rope and worsted weight yarn. Nice work on your crochet macrame scrap bowl. I hope you had fun making this and are inspired to do this with other materials. It's a great way to use up scrap macrame cord, like I said earlier, but you can also use just regular cording or rope to do this kind of crocheted basket, so you don't have to use scrap. It's just a great way that I've found to use up these pieces that sit around the studio because I don't want to throw them away. You can choose to use the same color yarn like I did and have that base color of the rope showing through the color of yarn you choose, or you could do stripes and change the yarn color as you're working. You would just add in your new piece of yarn as you're stitching, and then go in and stitch in the tails once you've completed your basket to make sure that they're nice and secure, so that they don't come loose or your basket doesn't fall apart. Well, again, thanks for joining me. I hope you have fun. Until next week, happy making, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.